Bible, there's a prophecy. And that prophecy says that in the end of time, all these people that were exiled, that we call the lost tribes of Israel, will get up and come back to Israel. And it'll start happening all over in the four corners of the world. And they'll just get up and start moving back. And what if it was actually happening? Here you have this prophecy, and people are actually getting up. They may be in your own neighborhood, and they're packing their bags into you. They're just somebody else packing their bags and moving. But in actual fact, they're responding to some kind of biblical post-hypnotic suggestion. I'm not talking about 1,000 years. I'm talking about 2,700-year-old suggestion that they're responding to now. And we could actually film these people and match the prophecy with the events. And the reason it should matter is that because once they do what they have to do, they trigger the apocalypse. Altars, children were sacrificed in pagan rituals. Scripture tells us that the tribes of Israel deserted the God of their forefathers and worshipped idols in places like this. The prophet said that for this sin, the Israelite tribes would be conquered and exiled until the end of time, when they would be found and redeemed. City in northern Israel. It is known to the world as Armageddon, a name synonymous with the apocalypse. But it won't happen before the Israelite tribes who once lived here return. According to prophecy, the countdown to the apocalypse and final redemption begins when the tribes are found, one by one. So this is the challenge before us. How are we going to find millions of people that no one has noticed? When I say find them, I don't mean discovering a people that's never made contact with Westerners. I mean taking very obscure pieces of a puzzle and going to very remote, sometimes dangerous places on the earth, and taking those pieces and putting them together and seeing, does this accord with a biblical prophecy? I have been on a journey, and I invite you to go on this journey with me. In the early 1980s, I went to Africa to document the plight of the Falashas, the black Jews of Ethiopia. These people were caught in the midst of persecutions, war, and famine. In 1991, the Falashas made international headlines when they were airlifted by the Israeli Secret Service to Jerusalem. What was little noticed is that the Israelis acted only after the chief rabbi ruled that the Falashas were descendants of the lost tribe of Dan. Can you imagine the lost tribes of Israel making front page news? Can you imagine the government of Israel acting on the words of rabbis who say this is the lost tribe of Dan, and suddenly modern aircraft swooping in to civil war Ethiopia as people from ages ago are airlifted into modern Israel? Seeing the Ethiopians in Jerusalem, I thought, was this just an anomaly, or was the biblical prophecy beginning to unfold? After the Falasha airlift in a tomato packing plant near the Gaza Strip, I came across a small group that most Israelis take for Thai guest workers. They are a people who come from the hill country on the India-Burma border. They say they are descendants of the lost tribe of Menashe, and there is at least one rabbi here who believes them.
We have to go and bring them before the Messiah arrives in Israel. Our tradition teaches us that in the end of days, the Jews, who are the descendants of the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, will bring the lost tribes to Israel so that they will participate in Messianic times.
I believe that the whole thing is in the realm of religious belief rather than in the realm of reality. That there is a strong necessity to find the tribes for religious theological reason, both Jewish and Christian. And those are the two religions that are active in tribe seeking, each one in its own way. And all the attempts to find them, I think, have no sound historical evidence. It is the belief that keeps the 10 lost tribes alive, not the people themselves.
Despite the skeptics, Rabbi Avichal has assisted hundreds of these people to emigrate to Israel and has supervised their formal return to Judaism. Can the rabbi be right? Is the key to the future submerged in these people's past? The story begins 2,900 years ago, when after Solomon's death, his biblical kingdom split into two. In the south, Judea, home to 3 tribes including Judah, which gave its name to modern-day Jews. In the north there was Israel, home to the people that would later be called the Lost Tribes of Israel. After the prophets predicted the event, the Assyrian Empire bore down on the northern kingdom of Israel.
The Assyrians, they are considered to be the real heavies. I guess you could call them the stormtroopers, the Prussians. They created what many, in fact, would tell you was probably the most potent military machine of its age. That is, sometime from about the end of the second millennium BCE, they began this inexorable march from their headquarters in the upper reaches of the Tigris, what is now eastern Iraq, the borders with Iran. And year after year, campaign after campaign, they just marched westwards. They marched as far as Israel, as far as the coast.
In 721 BCE, the Assyrians put to the torch many Israelite cities and deported most of the population. Most scholars believe that the tribes were lost because in exile they could not have held on to their identities. They must have assimilated.
We're talking about 2,700 years ago. There are historical documentations, historical records, actually found in excavations from, say, the 5th century BC that record Israelite names in Assyria. So at that time, maybe they still existed there, or a trickle of them existed there. After that, there is nothing, no documentation. So if you look at it historically, all kinds of people were exiled and got lost. And I believe that the 10 tribes also got lost.
But what if they are not lost and have preserved the memory of their ancient origins? What if they are waiting in their millions for their prophesied return? The hill country where Burma meets India is home to the people called Manmase or Manasseh, who are now claiming descent from the lost tribe of Menashe. is a war zone. Over and over in pursuit of the tribes, we found ourselves in the middle of a war zone. And what's the war about? It's about territory and ethnicity. And these people that call themselves Manasseh are fighting a people called Naga, and the Naga are saying, their enemies are saying, you don't belong here. You know, and we know, that you're not from here. Would you ever think that on the Indian-Burmese border there's a tribal conflict and being an Israelite is part of the issue? This area is called Manipur. It swarms with insurrectionist groups, and the Indian government has responded by turning Manipur into a police state. The local mortuary receives daily deliveries of the victims of Naga violence. In response, the Manasseh have begun to organize an underground army.
My village was attacked. My own house was burnt, and my uncle was killed. They destroyed my village. Israelites are good fighters. We are good fighters. That is why we are not afraid. We are not afraid to fight. We feel we are warriors.
We obtained this never-before-seen footage from Manasseh guerrillas who are dedicated to setting up an independent Israelite state in India.
The flag of Jalangam, which is the flag for the future sovereign state, has the Star of David in the middle. One, because the Manasseh believe they are one of the lost tribes of Israel from the tribe of Manasseh. Secondly, the Star of David is a neutral figure or symbol. All the clans would find it acceptable.
Into this cauldron comes Rabbi Avichai. He is drawn here by the fact that for reasons no one can explain, thousands of locals are now claiming to be Israelites. The rabbi has been researching the lost tribes for more than 35 years. He firmly believes that the Manasseh are indeed remnants of the tribe of Menashe, sent into exile 2,700 years ago.
This particular tribe seems to have been a rather lowly tribe in the area, economically poor, socially on the lower scale of society, and to people like that, the idea that they may be related to some divine promise of a huge and glorious future may have a very big appeal. And when Rabbi Avichai came, he already found a tribe that has managed to convince itself that it belongs to the 10 lost tribes.
We believe to be a Jew is not by body. To be a Jew is by soul. So you can be sometime in all the generation to change your body here and there, but the soul remain after all Jewish soul. And I believe in all my heart that you people have Jewish soul.
I want to go to Israel as soon as possible so that I can worship my God in peace and without any obstacle.
Israel today do it very, very slowly. My opinion is the main thing to bring all Menashe, the 10 tribes, will be the main goal of Messiah.
Thousands of Manasseh have decided not to wait passively for the Messiah. They have applied to emigrate to Israel. Despite those who would challenge their Israelite claims, they continue to practice Judaism in virtual isolation from the rest of the Jewish world.
In this small place called Manipur, which is at the corner of India, we're still alive and we are Jews and we like to go back to the place where we belong. We would appreciate it if things become better for us and we're allowed to go to that place which is our fatherland, that is Israel.
If this is really happening, it should be happening everywhere. Because the prophecy is clear. It's not a few people here and there. Ezekiel talks about the staff of Judah being rejoined with the staff of Joseph. And the staff of Joseph are the 10 lost tribes of Israel. There's 1.5 million Menashe. That's a lot of people. Where are the rest? So we said, okay, let's go back to the ancient sources. Where did they go? Where did they go? The Assyrians, who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and took the people into exile, had a propensity for making wall reliefs. And this is very fortunate for us, because it's almost like having someone with a video camera, a journalist with a video camera, present 2,700 years ago. Because after they destroyed the Israelites, they went home, created palaces, and created these huge wall reliefs showing the destruction.
You see them being killed and you see them being taken prisoner and you see them being deported. And it's a very clear difference. Obviously, killing is one thing. You see them being flayed alive. Taken prisoner, you only see men taken prisoner. And you see them being deported, you see them being deported in family units. So we've got a lot of evidence. They never deported people as just the men or just the women to be concubines or something. They deported families. They kept them together.
The only group of charioteers that the Assyrians retain intact as a elite unit of charioteers is an Israelite unit from Samaria. What this means is that they were appropriated by the core of the empire to the service of the center of the empire. The Israelite charioteers are retained intact.
The fact that they were kept together in military and family units gave us hope that perhaps they had survived the deportations after all.
That's a beautiful way of doing that. That's beautiful. I cannot say that it's impossible. No, I cannot say it's impossible. I would say it's very optimistic. People were thrown into nowhere amongst many other peoples, and we have no evidence whatsoever that anything survived the Assyrian melting pot.
Maybe the evidence lay elsewhere. We returned to the Assyrian reliefs, hoping that they could tell us their ancient story. From the Assyrian records, we learned that in the first assault, Assyria sacked 7 Israelite cities of the tribe of Naphtali and put the Naphtalites on the volatile border with Media. As the Assyrians lost ground to the Medes, the Israelites found themselves under Median rule in an empire that extended from modern Iran to Central Asia. Any Israelites living in Iran were later absorbed by mainstream Judaism. It was pointless to search here. Perhaps we would find the lost Israelites behind the former Median Empire, along the superhighways of the ancient world, across Uzbekistan, on the road to China. We picked up the trail in Uzbekistan, home to the legendary cities of Bukhara and Samarkand. Here we found ourselves in a forgotten region that had once been the prize of Alexander the Great and the Mongol warlord Genghis Khan. Founded over 2,500 years ago, Bukhara was the cultural center of the region.
From this place, one could go and trade in all directions. The city of Bukhara is really at the crossroads. The legendary Silk Route, which started in the 2nd century, came right through Bukhara. In the 12th century, the famous Jewish traveler Benjamin of Tudela wrote that there was a Hebrew tribe here which considered itself to be one of the lost tribes that were exiled by the Assyrians.
خانه‌پور مهمان آمده است شش صندوق جان تصدوق خانه‌پور مهمان.
As late as the 19th century, British missionary and explorer Joseph Wolfe reported that the lost Israelites could still be found living in Bukhara. Legend has it that the most ancient tombs here date back to biblical times, but we could find no markings linking them to Israelites. Not far from these tombs is a Jewish community of uncertain origin. The first clue that they are related to the lost tribes is the name Issacharov, common in this area and nowhere else. Issachar is one of the lost tribes, and many of the people here, including the local rabbi, claim Issachar as an ancestor. The Issachar lead did not take us any further, so we explored the Mahala, the Jewish quarter, to see if there was a connection to the tribe of Naphtali, also exiled to this area. At first, it seemed that all we could ascertain is that the community is very old.
For many hundreds of years, we've been preparing matzah in this oven. It is a very, very old custom. These customs are ancient, thousands of years old. When God gave us Jerusalem, we were preparing matzah by hand, just like this.
While the women prepare unleavened bread for Passover, the men slaughter a sheep in accordance with the biblical law. The tradition of the Paschal lamb is as old as the Bible itself. A sheep is slaughtered with an extra sharp knife in one quick cut. The blood is then drained and removed. At the time of the Exodus, a bush would be dipped in the blood and smeared on doorposts, identifying those homes as Israelite.
I'm rendering this animal kosher, as we have always done.
How are you doing that?
I'm discarding the sciatic nerve here, in accordance with Jewish law.
When they were first discovered, they didn't claim to be Jews, they claimed to be Israelites. It's only in the last few hundred years that they've integrated themselves into the body of the world Jewish community. And the Bukharan Jews are important because they tip you off that the history of the lost tribes is a hidden history. That there are political reasons why their history would have been hidden. So for example, in Bukhara, in Uzbekistan, this country that was part of the former Soviet Union, anything Israelite was hidden and locked up. Because it was not in the interests of the local authorities to say that Israelites were here before the supposedly indigenous people. And in Bukhara, we actually had a guide who ran the Bukharan Museum who was torn between pursuing the truth and looking out for himself in a political climate where it's still policy to hide anything Israelite. So for example, he gave us access to the basement of the Bukharan Museum. On top in the museum you have all the official history, and in the basement, locked up, you have anything Israelite. And what's in this musty, dank basement? Prayer books, silver platters with Hebrew alphabet on them, locked up. Torah scrolls, Bible scrolls are locked up as if they're some kind of state secret. Anything with a Hebrew letter, anything signifying some kind of historical Israelite presence, locked up. And then when we asked him about Israelites, he didn't want to talk directly about Israelites, but he said, you know, there were these people here that ruled Central Asia for 200 years, and they were called Eftalites.
From our recent digs, we've learned that in the 6th century, Bukhara was the capital of a mighty kingdom of Semites, which also ruled parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Now, in the 19th century, the Russian writer Shubinsky believed that it was in this region that the Israelites were settled. But the people who ruled the area were called Heftalites, and right up to the present day we are still debating the origins of the Heftali dynasty of Bukhara.
Who are these Heftalites? Have you ever heard of Heftalites? Any Heftalites here? I don't want to offend anybody. Looking in the Britannica, I found Heftalites. And what does the first line say? It says, this much-named and enigmatic tribe ruled Central Asia in the 5th and 6th centuries. Are we following here? Much-named, many names, and enigmatic, mysterious tribe. Now, why is a tribe that ruled Central Asia for 200 years mysterious? You'd think you'd get to know them after the first 100 years of rule. The second sentence was revelatory as well, because it says they were known to medieval writers as Eftalites and Nephthalites. It seemed to us that the Nephthalites must have been the lost tribe of Naphtali, but we wanted some hard archaeological evidence. We went to the Tashkent Institute of Archaeology, where we gained access to a restricted facility containing a treasure of ancient artifacts. Among them, 2,200-year-old potsherds. Clearly displayed on the ancient clay is Aramaic script, the day-to-day language of the Israelite tribes. Here we also met Professor Usmanova, a semi-retired archaeologist. And what does she have? She has, wrapped in a tea towel, a 1,700-year-old religious ritual object with Hebrew writings, with an Israelite name, with ram's horns, a religious object of Israelite origin from exactly the area that the lost tribes went to 1,000 years after they supposedly disappeared. Unbeknownst to most Israelis, the majority of Bukharan Jews have now emigrated to Israel. But the chain has been broken. They do not know that they may be descendants of the Naphtalites.
They say that we are descendants of the lost tribes, but we don't know which one. All we know is that we are Jewish. That's what is important. I hope that with God's help the redemption will come, and with it the ingathering of the tribes. Then we'll know which tribe we belong to. Until then, we identify with the tribe of Judah. If by my laws you walk and my commandments you guard and do them, I will give your rain in due season. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and you will dwell in your land safely, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people.